Hey friend, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here listening to another episode of the Pattern Design Circle podcast. Here we talk all about the ins and outs of designing knit and crochet patterns and running a business that makes it all possible. I'm Jessica, your host, knitting pattern designer, design mentor, and the friend in your ear. Can't wait to dive right in. Pattern Design Circle podcast is sponsored by the Pattern Design Circle, a membership community for knit and crochet pattern designers that are feeling lost, lonely, or frustrated in their business. It connects you with a supportive community that's always eager to answer your questions and help you through the hard times. And there's loads of resources and activities specifically catered to business and designing. Sound like your jam? Check it out at snickerdoodlenets.com/design-circle. That's Snickerdoodle, like the cookie, knits, knits.com/design-circle. All right, let's get into it. Welcome to episode 2 of the Pattern Design Circle podcast. I'm so excited that you are here again to talk about designing and business. So this episode is all about collaborating with yarn dyers. This can kind of be a big thing for designers, whether you're a knit designer or a crochet designer. So we will talk about why, how, all of the things. If you listen to the first episode, this one will probably be a little shorter, a little less passionate. Probably won't start crying, but you never know. So excited that you're here again. Let's go ahead and dive right in. So first of all, let's talk about why designers like to collaborate with yarn dyers and vice versa. So to start with, designers, probably number one reason that they tend to think of collaborating with yarn dyers is for yarn support. By yarn support, what I mean is that dyers will give yarn to designers for free for them to design with it. Now, in return, of course, the designer is responsible for creating a design using their yarn, actually referring to that yarn on the pattern, recommending that yarn, all of that kind of thing. We'll get a little bit more into the details of what to actually, like the arrangement can differ depending on the contract, the relationship, all of that. But yes. So often that's the first reason you think as a designer that you might want to collaborate with a yarn dyer is because for yarn. As a designer, you often are not making a lot of money on your patterns. Spoiler alert. And so receiving free yarn for your patterns is a nice way to reduce your expenses. Often the expenses, especially as a very beginner designer, are basically yarn and tech editing costs, maybe a website, things like that, if you've put that together. But yarn can actually be a big part of the cost of creating a design, even farther down the road, because that's the cost that you incur with every single design. And of course, depending on what kind of yarn you use, that can add up. So maybe let's go ahead and dive into a little bit of story time, talking about the first time I worked with yarn dyers as a collaboration. So let's wind back to July, August of 2019. I had started designing patterns in April. The first pattern that I had released in April of that year. So we're like a few months later. And I had maybe designed 4 or 5 patterns at that point, but I probably only had 3 published. And I reached out to these dyers and I was like, hey, I have this idea. Will you send me yarn? And looking back on it now, I'm like, wow, that was really brave of me. Like, I had a few designs out there, but they weren't like something shocking and eye-catching, I don't think. They're pretty simple, super bulky knits, basically. Mittens, hat, or mittens, I think is what I would have had out. I would have had on my Instagram profile, if you're watching the video, it's actually this shawl right here. But that is my Dancing in the Rain shawl, which is a bright summery blue-green, if you're familiar with my designs, lightweight one skein shawl. The first shawl that I had designed. So anyway, basically what I did was I reached out, I was like, hey, I have this idea. What I really wanted to do was create this collection of 4 designs that were all under this theme. I had it so planned out because I love symbolism and I've done a lot of symbolism telling stories in my patterns. The idea was I was going to design 4 shawls that were each a different shape, different textures, different colors. They all represented something different as basically a concept, a theme that I thought was important for the new year moving forward. Basically just in general important, but I wanted to release it as part of the new year, saying these are qualities that we need to have in our life throughout the year to have a successful year. So that is what is known as my Guiding Principles shawl collection. It does have 4 shawls. There are 2 DK weight, 2 fingering weight. Each of them is a different color because I had very specific intentions for all of them. Anyway, so when I reached out to the Dyers, I did have a clear plan of what I wanted. But I didn't have a whole lot of a portfolio to be like, hey, I'm an impressive designer, come check these out. So I did receive a few emails that were rejections, and I probably received some that people just didn't even respond. Kind of every time I talk about this, I'm kind of tempted to go back in my emails and see if I can find who it was, because I don't even remember. But what I think is so amazing is I had 4 independent yarn dyers trust me enough that they gave me yarn when basically I didn't know what I was doing. And it turned out great. So, it was all a happy ending. But, it still blows my mind to this day to think back to, wait, like they trusted me to do something amazing with their yarn and they gave it to me for free. Like, that is mind blowing. So anyway, all of that is basically to encourage you to not be scared to reach out. And then I hope this next bit that I'm going to share is going to encourage you even more. So inside of the design circle last fall, this is currently April 2022. So I think it was probably November 2021. Pretty sure it was November. We had 3 yarn dyers come and talk to us inside of the design circle all about yarn collaborations. So we got their opinions, and basically all of them said they're just so excited to work with designers, to collaborate with designers, to see what designers do with their yarn. They're just excited to support us. So that's really cool. And I think that was super inspiring to the designers inside of the design circle as well. You don't have to have a big, huge portfolio that looks all impressive. Sure, there will be some designers or some dyers, excuse me, I'm talking too fast, getting too excited, but there will be some dyers that will say no. And some of that might be because they feel like they're not a good fit for their brand. Some of that might be because they just already have a lot going on. Like, for example, I know one yarn dyer, she plans all of her collaborations out, like, I think in the fall. So she plans the next year out all in the fall. So if you were to reach out to her in March and be like, hey, I have a design idea, she's going to say, no, not right now. But she has like this application that you can complete for the next year. So anyway, do remember, like, even if you get a no, a quote unquote rejection, it doesn't necessarily mean no to you or to your design. It might just not be a good time or fit for that yarn company at the moment. All right, so basically, once I started designing with yarn dyers, independent yarn dyers, I've done almost all of my patterns since then as collaborations with yarn dyers. I've done My dishcloths I haven't done as collaborations, and I think I have one simple headband I've done since then. That was with box store yarn, but pretty much all of my designs are with yarn dyers. And part of that, yes, is for the yarn support. I get to work with really nice yarn that I wouldn't afford or pay for otherwise. So that is amazing. But as well as, or maybe even more than that, is the fact of a collaboration. Is working together and promoting each other. So when I design with a Yarn Dyers yarn, yes, I put their name on my pattern. I say, hey, this is the yarn that I used. And I link it. So I'm like, hey, go check out their website. And then I like to put together color combinations and things like that I share on my blog and on my Instagram and all of that kind of thing to talk about their yarn, to support them. But at the same time, they're doing the same thing for me, ideally. We'll talk about this in a bit, but make expectations clear so that there aren't surprises. Like they don't share your work and then you get really frustrated. But ideally, they will then share your work, your brand new pattern when you release it. Maybe even they'll share sneak peeks and they'll share it later on down the road when you tag them. That's one really great thing about Instagram. Tag the people that you're working with. So like, even if it's not your design or whatever, tag the designers, tag the yarn dyers. So they see it, they'll love that, but also so they can share it with their audience, because then they're promoting their stuff, but then it's also talking about you and how good your stuff is. And they already have an audience that likes them. And when you're doing stuff with them that resonates with their audience, that audience is likely to start following you too. No, not everybody. There's such a small percentage that sees content on Instagram anyway. But I think that most of my following on Instagram has really come from collaborations, from people sharing my work with their audience. So it's more valuable than just the yarn that you receive from the yarn dyer as yarn support. All right, so that talks about my story. And now I've released 40 knitting patterns, and I don't know the actual number, but I know I've definitely worked with over 20 designers. Some of them I've worked with several times. So, all right, now let's talk about how the collaboration actually works. What does this look like? Sometimes, occasionally, the yarn dyer will reach out to you and ask you to design something with their yarn. But a lot of times that doesn't happen until A, you already have a relationship with them, you've already been designing with their yarn, and or B, you're pretty well known in the yarn world. So, like if you watch the podcasts of like these bigger designers, they'll talk about going to yarn festivals or talking to dyers, and they just get a whole bunch of free yarn that they're supposed to design with. So yeah, that does happen, but don't expect it to begin with, like at the very beginning. So the work is going to be on you, especially at the beginning, to reach out to the dyer. If you have like yarn around here, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina area, we have multiple yarn shops that also dye their own yarn. So if you have that situation around you where you can go to a yarn shop close to you and the folks there are dyeing their own yarn, that might be an easy way to strike up conversation, really connect, and then ask about using their yarn for a design, because folks seem to really like doing things with local folks. So, and I know just in general, like going to yarn shops around the country, and there's somebody who dyes the yarn there, they're almost always excited to work with designers. So that's one place you can start. Otherwise, if there are dyers that you're following online that you love, or you're or maybe already knitting with their yarn, reach out to them. Don't be scared to ask. The worst they can say is no, and then you just go find somebody else to work with. So there are lots of dyers out there to work with. So don't let it get you down if you get a no. Just move on to the next one. And so when you reach out to them, it's important to know what you want. Have a design idea. Just don't reach out and just be like, hey, I want some free yarn, because then that doesn't sound quite as trustworthy. Even if you're like, hey, I'm a designer, I'd like to design with this yarn. If you don't have a design plan, it might feel a little sketch to the dyer. So it's really recommended. And, you know, some of this information is also coming from the call that I had inside of the design circle with the dyers. So I also one year, let's see, that was 2020, the end of 2020, I sent out a survey to all of the dyers that I had worked with, which is over a dozen at that point. And it was like, hey, I basically kind of just want to know what you guys are looking for. How can I support you more? And so I asked a bunch of questions like, what are you looking for when somebody wants to collaborate with you? And is it more important to use this kind of yarn or that kind of yarn, or, you know, all of these different kinds of things. So based on my conversations with dyers and the feedback I have received from them, they usually like to know that you have a plan. So have a design idea. And, you know, if you have a sketch or a swatch or something like that, you could share that, but you can also just share a description. Like most of the time, I just have a description. So I can say, I am planning on, let's use one of my past designs. I am wanting to design a shawl that is inspired by my home state, the state of Montana, and I want to represent the farmland by using a cable motif that looks like a wheat stalk. And I want it to be this big cozy shawl that uses this dirt brown and this tan color. So it's like, it's the colors of the plains of Montana. So that was basically what one of my proposals was that I sent to a yarn dyer, and she said yes, and I got the yarn support for, and now that is my Wear the Buffalo Roam shawl. So basically have a plan. And then also, if you have expectations of the dyer, I like to include those in that first email. So by expectations, I mean, you want to have the yarn by X date so that you can actually follow through with your plan by your planned release date. Also, things like, this is my release date. I expect you to share this with your email list and your social media following. I will send you the photos, but you're setting this expectation at the beginning. And, you know, the more you work with yarn dyers, you'll understand, you'll be more clear on what it is exactly you want. But for me, it is important. I want yarn and time, because I have a schedule that I'm sticking to, because I have my whole year of designs planned and release dates and all of that. And then for me, them promoting my work is really important. So I want to be sure that they're going to share it. So basically, yeah, in that first email, share a little bit about yourself, but mostly talk about your design idea, talk about why you love their yarn, why their yarn will be a good fit for this design idea, and then share any expectations that you have for the collaboration. Now, I used to always think that the dyer was just so overwhelmed with everything they had to do in life that I needed to make their life as easy and simple as possible. So I always knew exactly what yarn base or bases I wanted to use and color or colors I wanted to use. So I would spend all of this time browsing through all of their things wherever I could find it on the interwebs. Spoiler alert, a lot of dyers don't have their whole color catalog on their website, which as a designer looking for colors, sometimes that can be really frustrating. So then I would go onto their Instagram account and see if there were other colors that really fit my design idea. So I used to always have a color and base completely chosen. Basically, I was like, hey, this is my design idea. This is what I want. Are you interested in providing yarn support and collaborating on this project? And I would say most of the time that's a yes. I don't know if that's actually true because there have been a lot of no's. But I've also now collaborated with a lot of dyers. So there have been a lot of yeses. So then of course, the dyer has to respond. And if they don't respond within a couple weeks, I like to reach out again. Sometimes I get emails back then that people are like, oh, I never saw your first email. I don't know why that is. Like if their email inbox is just really full or if something happened with the interwebs. But don't be afraid to reach out again. And if for nothing else, to know that it's either a yes or no for yourself. And so you're not just like sitting there waiting. Yeah, definitely reach out again. And then depending on the dyer's schedule and stuff, you'll get that all figured out exactly when you'll get the yarn and all of that. So what I have learned though is that some dyers actually really love the collaboration process of actually working with you as a designer. And what I mean by that is you don't always have to know exactly what base and yarn color you're going to work with, which is kind of cool. Like some dyers will do a custom color just for you. Others will take the time to like go through their colors with you and make recommendations. And one yarn dyer that I'm working with right now, Laura of Camp Fiber Yarns, she actually she'll do a video call with you while she's down in her yarn studio, and she'll bring the colors to the camera, show you different combinations, and then you can actually see everything next to each other and get a really good idea of what actually you like. So I think that's really cool. But what I mean to say there is maybe it's okay if you don't know exactly what colors you're going to use from their palette. It can probably still be really helpful if you have an idea of what colors you want to use in general, like turquoises or whatever. But the dyers are willing to work with you and collaborate on colors and choosing colors and creating colors and all of that. So then this applies to all collaborations in general, but it also applies to collaborating with yarn dyers. Throughout the entire process, communicate. If something isn't working right, communicate. If it's not going to work and your design idea is not going to work with their yarn, let them know early. Don't wait until it's time to release the pattern and they'll be like, oh, it didn't work. I'm sorry. They're not going to be too happy about that. But if you communicate early and communicate often, that is pretty much the recipe for success anytime you're working on a collaboration. That also includes, I like to tell the designer, hey, I finished the sample, and show them a photo. Usually they get really excited. If it's a really large project, they also love to see progress photos. So feel free to send them photos. They're excited about what you're creating. They're excited that you're creating something with your yarn, their yarn, and they're excited about you just creating something in general. So don't be afraid to share progress with them. Often they really love it. And then I like to tell them when it's going out to test knitters. Some dyers like to provide a discount for test knitters if the test knitters choose to work with their yarn. So if you worked with, let's say 6 and 7 fiber for that's who you're collaborated with for your design. Rachel, the owner of 6 and 7 fiber, she might decide that she would like to offer a discount if your testers also want to use her yarn. So then you have more samples of the same yarn, and then it's supporting the yarn dyer as well. In my experience, testers don't take that up very often. The testers that at least I work with, they often are working from stash, so they are not buying new yarn for a new chest knit. But that is something that's a possibility that you can ask your yarn dyer that you're collaborating with, if that's something they're interested in doing. Then 2 weeks before the design release, I like to reach out again, and you can set whatever timeline you want, but I like to reach out again and be like, hey, reminder, this is happening, this is still on schedule. Here's the photos, here's all the graphics that I've created so that you can promote it. Do you need anything else from me? So that's just kind of a reminder, just in case they didn't have it on their calendar or they forgot and got busy, that's coming out. Now, something on release dates. That's another thing to communicate early and communicate often. Dyers do not like it, if you don't tell them the release date, because then how are they supposed to promote it? How are they supposed to create the yarn for it for other people to make, and all of that? And B, they do not like it when you release your pattern early, especially without asking them, because a lot of dyers like to have that yarn in stock when you release it, so that folks who want to knit it and love what you created can knit it with the same yarn. Also, several dyers like to create kits. So they'll put together their own color combinations for the pattern, and they want to be able to have that available when you release the pattern. So from my experience working with designers, I've never done it myself, but I have heard their frustration of when a designer releases a pattern early and they're not prepared for it. And it just makes it not nearly as successful. Really frustrating for them as well. Now, also on that token, I had mentioned kits. That's another question I always like to ask the dyers, either early on. Well, I like to ask them early on, and then like in the first couple of emails, but then I also like to ask them again closer to the release, or more rather to confirm what they had said. So always ask them, are you interested in creating kits? You can then, depending on how many kits they want to sell, you can sell your patterns to them wholesale and get a lot of pattern sales that way, because then they're selling them as kits. And some companies like to run knit-alongs and things like that as well, that then promote sales of their yarn and sales of your design. So it's really kind of how the collaboration works. Now, I actually had a blog post already on this that I posted. I don't remember when I posted it, but I had summed up a few things that yarn dyers want designers to know. A couple of them I've already touched on, but let's go ahead and cover them again real quick. Number one is communication is key. They want to hear from you. They want to know that things are going well, or if they aren't going well, they want to know about that too, just so that they know what to expect. And then, like I said, I think as a designer, it's important to remind them that the release is coming up, especially if you want them to share it. Now, second of all, I just mentioned this, but dyers do not want you to change the pattern release date without letting them know. And that is because sometimes they've adjusted their whole schedule, their whole dye schedule, to accommodate your pattern release. And then if you don't release it when you say you're going to release it, it kind of just makes them look bad. And they're not prepared and ready. So then last of all, planning is important. So just like a designer, we aren't going to want to commit to 10 designs that are all going to be due in the same week, like ready to release in the same week, because then it's going to be hard to talk about all of them. Dyer also doesn't want to have a bunch of yarn collections and pattern releases that they're supposed to be sharing all at the same time either. So they want to be able to plan things out. They also have to have time to put your yarn together and get it shipped to you. And remember that they have dye schedules. And some of them are not working full-time in their business. So be courteous and give them plenty of time to plan ahead, to make sure that it's going to fit in their timeline, not only to get the pattern to you, but also to dye the yarn for the release and have kits and market your design. So yeah, those are the top 3 things that I've heard from Dyers that they really want designers to know, and that's really what's going to make the whole collaboration successful. I think it really is important to be on the same page the whole time, to be communicating the whole time, and to be realistic. So my biggest tip is to have fun and enjoy the experience. Sure, there's a lot of things to keep track of and to feel like, oh, now I have to remember to do this and this and this, and all of these different things. Don't let it overwhelm you. Enjoy the process. Figure out how to make it work for you so that you're doing what you love. That's why we're here, right? Because we're trying to do what we're passionate and what we love to do. So if you have any questions about collaborating with yarn dyers, go ahead and reach out to me on Instagram at Pattern Design Circle. And if you are a Design Circle member, of course, you can watch the replay of our conversation with the yarn dyers from last fall. It is in our replays. And if you're not a part of the Design Circle, for the month of April, this is April 2022, I currently have doors open for the whole month, so you can join the Design Circle at any time. So if you choose to join today, you will have access to our conversation with the yarn dyers today. Also, this month we have a design along running where we are designing alongside each other, asking all of our questions, talking about the process. It's basically a knit along or crochet along for designers. So it's been a lot of fun. We have 2 calls every week, and we're just sharing all the things. I'm loving sharing all the things. So if that would be a good fit for you, we would love to have you inside. That is snickerdoodleknits.com/design-circle. That will be in the show notes, but snickerdoodleknits.com/design-circle. And if you're following me on Instagram already at Pattern Design Circle, you can find that link also in my bio. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know if you have any questions. If you found it helpful, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. So I will be talking to you soon about more business and designing tips. Wow. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you found it valuable, please share the podcast with a designer friend. And if you have a minute, leave a review. It's so helpful and means the world to me. Chat soon.